Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today. Very excited. Corey, good to have you back on. Always
Good to be
good to
on.
have you. While I do all that, of course, I want everybody else, like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, do all that good stuff so you get your email in the morning whenever we go live, which is, of course, every day. Now, we're going to be talking about passing the torch today. And there's no better concept of passing the torch than this. In Flanders fields, the poppies blow, between the crosses row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the larks, still bravely singing, fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunsets glow, loved and were loved, and now lie in Flanders field. Take up our quarrel with the foe, to you from failing hands we throw, the torch be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields. Now, the reason I quoted that poem was because, to me, that hits on what passing the torch really is. It's about honoring the sacrifices of those that came before us. Those are my thoughts, though. What are your guys' initial thoughts, Corey? What do you think?
Oh, that's that's heavy. I agree with you, obviously. Um, I made some notes prior to the show, and part of that was more so passing knowledge. But I know I've mentioned it before on the collective about standing on the shoulders of giants. I think that that is also similar to what you're saying about passing the torch. We pass it consciously and unconsciously to the people around us and people that we don't even know, especially in when I think about referencing in Flanders Fields. That's still passed. That torch is still passed to anybody who reads it and anybody who says it out loud. The legacy of which isn't always fully understood, even though you have the torch. So you're holding the torch, but you're not necessarily sure how it's being lit, why it's being lit, and what it's lighting, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. Sean, initial thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, as was said, it's a heavy concept. That sort of legacy. I think it would be nicer to start off a bit lighter. What the heck? We'll talk
Hey,
about
man.
that in the green room.
Indeed.
So the definition of legacy, maybe we'll have to define that in 10 or 15 minutes so that we can get the conversation going. All I will say on that poem is I think something that people forget is they understand that there was sacrifice made, and then it's for the individual to hold himself accountable. But a part of that poem states we're essentially at the end, we're still paying attention, even from where we are in our graves. We're watching. And so I think that level of accountability is often forgotten. The past is considered a memory that can be looked at through a book or through video or through stories, but it's not often looked at as a two-way street. It's looked at in that direction towards the past, but rarely do people think about the past looking out towards us from the graves, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
And so that level of accountability is not often considered or talked about. But maybe we'll save that for another podcast and get on to something called legacy.
I took it as a tie-in, and I think it really is because legacy is defined as something handed down from an ancestor or predecessor or from the past. Synonym for it would be heritage, but I think that, as you said, we forget about what has been passed on. And I know I did. I've forgotten many times. And the reason I started with Flanders Fields was the fact that that is a stark reminder that we have here in Canada, at least, every year to do your best, to live for the sacrifices past. But on November 12th, November 13th, blah, 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 throughout the year, it's the reminder is slowly worn away. Now, I do want to talk about legacy and passing on the torch in terms of, um, what we do now applies forward. But I wanted to start with the fact that what we do now is also built upon what has happened. You got thoughts on that, Corey, at all?
Yeah, I mean, again, when I'm thinking of passing a torch and things like that, really honestly, when I was initially thinking about it prior to your poem, I was thinking about me moving forward. So me passing things forward. You mentioned legacy and things like that. So to me, the torch, it's an example of my knowledge, my experience, my triumphs, and my struggles. But it's not everything. I can pass it, but you have to run with it. I can't run it for you. So I'm passing that torch and saying, here you go. Even sometimes if you don't want it, but you still have to pick it up and you still have to go. I can't do that. So the legacy, the heritage side of things, it's heavy, but it needs to be redefined every time it's picked up. Ultimately, I mean, the goal of any leader, coach, or parent is for those learning from us to exceed us. So I don't want you to run the torch in the same way that I did. I want you to run it better. I want you to have the torch burn brighter. I want you to add your own experiences to it, your own struggles, your own triumphs, your own knowledge. And when you pass it forward, hopefully you pass it to 3 different people because it burns bright enough that you can pass it to 3 different people and not just one.
I like that. It's talking about the ability to strip away what's not needed, or strip away what isn't useful in the moment, I guess, or maybe strip away is not quite a great word. What do you think, Sean?
Okay, let's get to legacy, shall we?
Oh, come on. Okay. Okay.
Oh, I'm box breathing right now. So,
Okay.
Corey, that was a great direction. I think that we should take this conversation. The legacy of the now. I mean, we can't control the past. The past is gone. And if we're talking about the legacy of the past, well, what we're talking about is a static conversation that we can learn from, that we can maybe do another time. Let's talk about the legacy that we are delivering in real time, in the now, in the present, either as parents or as leaders within our community, whether that's a digital community or your neighborhood, as it were. That's what I'd like to talk about. And Corey's already established some of the, not characteristics, but some of the outcomes that can come out of that, some of the things to target lock on what's important with legacy. The passing the torch is being mentioned. I don't know if anyone's picking up what I'm throwing down there with my hat. That was a stage prop that was unconsidered before this conversation, but this stage prop that I'm wearing on my head right now is something that guides me every day since I got my Pathfinder torch. And so that's my only reference to the past, is the things that I have accomplished in the past, but today, right now, guide me in this conversation in order to lead the way for others, perhaps, or light the way for others more correctly with the torch. And of course, the most important part of that conversation, as I've said before in other podcasts, it's my greatest responsibility to prepare someone to pass that torch to them so that they can then guide the way. So it's not just about me shining a light on my own path. That's a minor aspect of it. It's me shining a path forward to hand that torch off to the next person.
Interesting. Corey,
Yeah,
you look like you have
yeah.
something to say.
I want to touch base on that a little bit. So when we think of passing the torch, obviously the physical act of passing the torch, but it doesn't stop shining for you. And something that I want to specify is it doesn't mean that you're done when you pass the torch. It just means that you don't need to be in front specifically. You can still be running with the pack. You can still be adding to that. You can still be part of that collective. It doesn't mean that the minute you pass off the torch, you fall by the wayside and you're in the ditch dying. Your knowledge and your experience are still right there. And in some cases, depending on the situation, you may need to pick that torch back up again if it's faltered. If you're the one who is running it, and you're seeing that something is not happening, somebody is not carrying it properly, somebody isn't showing the respect that it needs, maybe you need to take it again. Maybe you need to run with it. And maybe you need to hold on to it for a little bit until you can pass it to somebody who's going to hold it up. That idea of legacy, that idea of building upon what you've done is just as important. So you stay with it, you stay running with it. And like I said, sometimes you pick it up and then you hand it back.
Interesting. Kind of goes to what you were saying earlier about accountability, Sean, at least in my mind. You got any addition to it?
No, I agree with what Corey just said, and I think it's a really important aspect of the conversation that it is not a one and done thing. I've handed my torch off to some degree in a bunch of different industries. Actually, a comment came on my live IG chat this morning, and the comment was legacy, just kind of like I did with Julie Kelly. In other words, me handing off my 15 years of coaching business off to Julie Kelly, who was one of my athletes that I was coaching. And the reason that I handed that torch off to her is because she was the best candidate for that job, because I'd spent some time not grooming her, but creating a great coach, a coach in the making for sure, but a coach that's ready to coach the moment that I handed her my torch. And the moment that I handed it to her, as Corey said, I didn't jump in the ditch and fall asleep. I kept my eyes on that objective. As any good Pathfinder would, you fade off into the background, disappear, and keep eyes on the objective and form the pattern. Make sure that the area of concern is being managed well, and it is, and it was. And so the more I observed, the more I could fade into the background. But I'm always available for Julie Kelly if she's ever got any questions. I'm always available for anyone that I've coached in the past that reaches out to me with a question or what have you. And nowadays, the athletes that I've coached for 5, 8, 10, 12 years, whatever the case is, they're not reaching out to me for things like, hey, what wattage should I run on that next race in order to win? That ain't the question that I get asked anymore. It's question about their kids, or about the job that they're thinking about, or maybe I'm going to buy a house, but I'm not sure if that's the right move because my company wants me to ... When you're passing the torch isn't one dimensional. You're passing the torch on to someone for a specific reason that has a whole pile of other things wrapped around it. It's when I asked Julie to take over my company, or not quite obligated her to, but informed her that someone needed to coach those athletes and it was going to be her. I did that with full faith that she was going to do a great job, but I also did it with faith that I was going to be in the game with her, ebbing and flowing as on the level of support that she required in the moment. And if she contacts me later this afternoon and has a question about what's the best dog to buy for a mountain bike partner, well, we'll jump into that question and answer as well, because that's what you do. You pass the torch on to someone, but the torch lights the immediate space of the subject that you're passing the torch off for. But all that stuff that is in the shadows but still kind of visible, you're also going to be managing that or talking about that, or two-way highwaying on a bunch of other subjects that are just outside of the subject matter expertise, assuming you're a good coach who cares about people more than just making them fast on the mountain bike, as it were.
That makes sense too, because you want, ideally, you want them to be a better person in order to be a better mountain biker or better whatever. You want them to be a better person in general. I got the thought of perhaps it's not so much at least the connotation in my head was always the physical passing of a torch, right? Like, I'm going to now hand you a full torch and you're going to go off and do whatever you want. But it seems to me it's much more along the lines of sharing the flame of that torch rather than actually passing anything physically off. You're just more sharing and then allowing that person to take their own path. It's slowly coalescing in my brain as we're going.
Well, you better hurry up and figure it out, because you know that torch, it's called a microphone. and I'll be handing it off to you sometime in the future. Not today, of course, but
Not today,
sometime in the
apparently.
future. And part of my job, believe it or not, it's been in my mind right from the get-go, is not to groom Chance Burles into the mega host and then take over the show as a one-man domination party, but I'm trying to create myself and yourself into the best versions of ourselves so that, man, if I die tomorrow, this whole thing doesn't fracture and fall apart. I'm not that important that it can't keep steamrolling ahead, but I'm important enough now that I got to keep pushing the pace so that if I do hit the deck tomorrow, this thing can keep steamrolling. And so it's passing the torch isn't a okay, everyone, let's get together at 1400 hours on Sunday. We're passing off the microphone to Chance Burles. We're going to have trumpets. It's a big deal. It's a formal moment.
There you go.
That's not the way it goes. When you're passing off the torch, it doesn't have to be in front of the entire brigade. It can be bit by bit by bit spread over a year or two where you pass off that mic, and it's going to happen. It's going to happen to us all. We all have to pass over the mic. But it shouldn't just be a, well, you're not very good behind a mic. Off you go. See you later. Trumpets played. That was the time. 1400 hours. Too late. These are things that should be considered long in advance. They should be a stage that is set over months or years, and it should be something that you feel good about when that thing is being passed off, bit by bit by bit, that you can see the general outcome in the not too distant future, where you're satisfied with what you're passing on right now in order to build something then.
Absolutely. Corey, you got any thoughts?
Obviously, the example that Sean's using is the ideal thing, the slow feed, as it is, of passing the torch. But I want to ask you a question. What about if you're passing a torch to somebody who doesn't want to receive that torch, and not specifically they're against it, as in nope, I'm not going to be your turnip farmer heritage, legacy thing where we were always turnip farmers, and I don't want that. I'm talking about even something as simple as, a bit morbid, but what if you have a parent who's passing away slowly, but a lot sooner than they should, and they know it, and you know it, and they're trying everything they can to pass that torch. Eventually, if you're young, you may need to take over that position. You may need to take that position in the family, I should say, and you don't want to have that torch passed. So what do you do as the person passing that torch in a limited amount of time to somebody who doesn't want to receive that torch? What do you think?
Well, I think you inform them. You inform them that it's going to happen, just as I did now to Chance, which I informed him of yesterday, which I've informed him of in many occasions in the past, in the green room. It's just that nobody got to hear it up until now in that way. And so I'm regularly reminding people around me that nothing is permanent. There is no permanence on this journey. There's only fluidity. And if we're shaping our fluidity right, then we can create successful outcomes in the future by passing the torch bit by bit, day by day. I'd go off to mountain bike races, like down in the US, to a 24-hour solo mountain bike race many, many years ago. And before I'd fly, I'd say to the boys, actually, I'd say to Evan, because he's the oldest man in the house, and he'd be like 10 years old or whatever, and I'd say, okay, so I'm going to head off. I'll be gone for about 2 or 3 days. You're the man of the house while I'm gone. These are the things you need to think about. And so it wasn't a whole pile of pressure that I put on him, but right from the get-go, from when the boys have been young, the idea of mortality has been introduced to them. Not so much that it's a regular conversation, but enough that it's not really uncomfortable, and enough that it is not a shock when things take hard lefts or hard rights in the journey called life. So I don't think change should be an ambush conversation. I think if you realize there's change on the horizon, you should start pre-positioning the idea or the information data set into the individual who's in front of you and let them start processing it to some degree. Now, depending on who's in front of you, how old they are, what their life experience is, what the expectations are, the general outcomes, etc., that conversation is very nuanced if you want to make it nuanced. But if it's a general concept of this is this, then you don't have to get into too much detail. You just have to position life is funny. Things happen. And let's talk about that, depending on their age.
Those are hard conversations to have with kids, but they don't have to be hard conversations, is what I think you're trying to say. And the thing that clicked in my brain as you were talking about it was succession planning, and how little we do of it in everyday life in terms of just general succession planning. If this, then what, right? And I think that it really ties into the original point of accountability, is that if you're going to be accountable for your future, then you should have a plan in place when things don't go according to plan. Corey, what are you thinking? What are you thinking? You gotta nodding up and down like you know what I'm talking about.
I think so. Again, and I've talked about it on this podcast before, but I was lying in the hospital, and I wasn't sure what was going to happen with me. And basically, the one thing that kept coming into my head was, oh, I haven't even talked to my kids about this. I haven't even told them about this. We've never even broached the subject, whether or not it was a memory or a value that I had or a story that I had. And it was interesting that I came up with like 20 things just almost immediately that I thought, if I never make it out of here, that's such a shame that I didn't get to do that. So I think maybe for the listeners and the watchers, I want you to think on that. I want you to think about the fact that you're lying in bed. You're not going to be able to get out. You're not necessarily going to be able to talk to anybody. What are the top 5 things that you wish somebody knew? And that's that succession. And it doesn't necessarily have to be knowledge, but everything is knowledge. It's your stories, it's your triumphs, it's your struggles, it's your fears, it's your strengths. I've got 2 young girls. Never talked to them about boys specifically. Well, maybe I should sit down and talk to them about boys in a spoon-fed sort of way. It doesn't have to be an hour-long podcast type thing, but something where I give them a little bit of a talk, or tell them a funny story or a stupid story, or the way I met their mom or something like that. Something that I want them to be able to build upon. Maybe I tell them that story again in 2 years. I'm still here in 2 years, and I keep building on that. And because they have that groundwork of that initial 5 things that I desperately needed to tell them if I was lying in my deathbed, that I'm able to build on it again and build on it again and build on it again over the years or the months. And by passing that torch, I'm doing it like Sean was saying, bit by bit. And in the end, I'm running beside them because they're already carrying that torch, and I'm still here to watch it.
Like that, Sean.
Well, I think what you'll find is, and maybe at least this is what I found, is you open up a little bit, and that leads to a conversation, and then later, whatever, months, years later, doesn't much matter, a year and a half later, the conversation comes up again, and it'll come up by itself. It won't be a forced conversation. It'll just pop up out of nowhere. The conversation will start rolling, and you add a bit more detail. A little bit more nuance, a little bit more about their dad. And that's the way I've done it myself. And it just naturally unfolded in a way that allowed me to just add a bit more detail each time. Some stories have been told maybe too many times, who knows? But every time the conversation starts and finishes, there's been another small element added to the story that an 8-year-old wouldn't understand, nor did they need to know, but an 18-year-old can understand and wanted to know. And so that is a way of life, I think. If you open up to the conversation and have it at the age appropriate or the detailed appropriate level as an opening conversation, guaranteed you're going to have that conversation again in the future, and it'll show itself up at the right time. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I want to add on that too, is have those conversations, and specifically, if I'm talking about myself, have that conversation where I'll explain a time when I was really scared about something but did it anyways. And when it's appropriate or age appropriate, I'll ask my girls, when were you scared? When did you have fear? And how did you get over it? Because what they're going to be doing is tying a memory that they have to a story or a memory that I have, so that when they think about something in their past, it immediately then clicks over to, I remember when my dad told me a story about what he did. There's your legacy. There's your building on it. There's your passing that torch. So start early by doing that and asking them to draw on their own experience based off of something that you've told them. Age appropriate, obviously, but
uh, I have this thought, and I'm Sean. You say regularly that life is not an ambush. Life can be an ambush if you're unprepared, right? Like if you just are completely unprepared, then life can be an ambush. But in order to backstop yourself from being ambushed, I think that's what we're talking about, is that you're passing on those little bits of information to the next generation, to that next whatever, whether it's through work, whether it's through life, whether it's through family, whether it's through your circle on the jujitsu mats, right? You're passing on those little tidbits of information at a time to help backstop the ambush of life. If that am I making sense at all there, Sean, or am I off base?
Yeah, I think it works for sure. The more you put out, the more you're prepared. The more you take in, the more you're prepared. Prepared is prepared, and the opposite of prepared is doing nothing. Not thinking, not doing. The moment that you start thinking, well, you're about 10% into the game. The moment that you start doing, you're the other 90% into the game. And so all of the thoughts of how to stop the ambush that nobody understands, that's just you wasting your life. But thinking about the high probability ambushes, that is not wasted life. That is pre-consideration of moments that have high probability, and that's you preparing yourself for the near future. That's what we all should do. We should all think about when we're going to die. We should all think about what we want to leave behind. Funnily enough, at the dinner table just yesterday, Evan's heading off to Kelowna today. We're going to drop him off at UBCO. In fact, about 10 minutes after we're finished this podcast, I'll be climbing into a car. And so as we were at the dinner table yesterday, the topic came up once again about when dad dies. Because I'm that age, I guess. And so Evan said, well, when dad dies, I want his katana, I want his watch, and etc. And so I'm good with that, man. I'm totally good with the fact that my boys have already thought about what they want for me when I'm dead. Because it's gonna happen. There's no duck dodging and diving it. And the fact that we can have that kind of not full out knee slapping laugh at the dinner table, but just kind of chuckle about the fact that when I'm dead, that's what he wants, and he's going to argue with his brother over it. I think that's freaking great, because that's facing the moment that everyone's going to face, but it's more correctly considering the outcomes of things throughout life, and what is memorable to him and what will be memorable in the conversation that we had last night. This succession planning, as it were, not succession planning of when I'm dead, the oldest boy takes over the empire and then starts slaying all the dragons, not that kind of succession, but the realities of life, and what these kind of things mean to our family. Last night we took a photo of our dog Strider. He's a chocolate lab. He's getting up in age. I think he's maybe got another year left in him, maybe. My wife seems to think that he'll live forever. Not really, but she figures 2.5 years. I think a year, maybe. Maybe she said a year and a half. But the fact remains that he's not quite on his last legs, but it's going to happen. I can see it on the horizon now. And so we got a family photo with him on our back deck and tried to recreate a family photo that we took about a decade ago with our previous our black lab called Pico, who we named up on a mountaintop in Spain when Doreen and I were on our honeymoon. And so the legacy or the continuation of family culture and habits and routines and what's important to us as a atomic unit. These are all things that are relevant to passing the torch. My wife was the one who said, "Hey, we got to get this photo before Evan bounces off to Kelowna." She was the one who wanted to set it up and recreate the photo from our last Black Lab. And these are great ideas that I wouldn't have done because I wouldn't capture the moment in a way that is as meaningful as she could see the moment being captured. And I think that's kind of an important part of the conversation. Passing the torch isn't just some robotic, autonomous, non emotional process that is ones and zeros, bits and bytes. The passing of the torch has some emotion to it. The passing of the torch has some reflection on it. The passing of the torch has some meaning to it. It's not just a flip a switch, push the red button, and then turn away from the moment. You can wrap a lot of meaning into the moment as you're passing on a torch, and you don't have to. But if you can consider adding meaning to the moment, the other person on the receiving end may take it, may value it enough in the moment that they latch onto that torch and do something with it. So I'm not saying that handing a torch off to someone and saying nothing is the right or wrong way. And I'm not saying that taking a torch and handing it off to someone and giving them an hour-long briefing is the right or wrong way. I am saying that when you pass the torch, you've got to attach some heft to it so that the individual who's receiving it understands the importance of it, what they're about to carry, what they're representing, what the weight of that torch is, what the importance of it is for the future, not just for them, but for the people that they haven't even met yet.
Corey and I were talking in the green room before this, and we, we actually were talking about convenience at the time, but the concept of passing something on and having a heft to it goes into the fact that when you don't put any heft into it, it becomes flippant. It becomes who cares, right? Oh well, but yeah, sure. I just took somebody's legacy, whatever. I don't need like. It allows for the granting of jumping off the shoulders of giants, as Corey was saying earlier, and I wanted you to expand on that a little bit. Like when you actually stand on the shoulders of giants, you need to be able to recognize that you are standing on the shoulder of a giant, at least in my mind. Because if you don't, then it feels like you're standing on a ground floor, in my mind. What do you think, Corey?
Often when we're standing on the shoulders of giants, as it were, it's solid. So we're standing there like we're not high up. We feel like we're on the ground, as it were. The view may be nicer, but because everybody below us has been solid, so are we. It's not until you start trying to stand on the shoulders of non-giants that you start seeing how precarious that is and how maybe not secure you are. So the idea of understanding the heft and the responsibility you have when you're receiving that torch, I think that it can get lost if somebody has simply been handed it. So if they're already standing on stable ground, they're already are standing on the shoulders of giants that aren't moving, that legacy isn't going to go anywhere. There is a disconnect. Somebody hasn't been shown exactly the fact that there's 20 or 30 people below them that have had to be rock solid in order for them to have that perch to continue on from. And if they don't understand that heft, if they don't take the time to be as solid as those people are and to understand the legacy, it's going to be shaky from there up. And once it's shaky from there up and everybody else tries, like I can pass on a torch to my family, but if there's not much in that torch, then what are they receiving? And then somebody tries to stand on top of that and there's nothing handed the next time and somebody tries to stand on the shoulder of that. Well, guess what? I've effectively destroyed that legacy in 3 generations because there was no understanding, there was no respect, there was no accountability for what was getting passed to me. And because there was no understanding of it, and maybe that was my fault for passing it off and not explaining it, but I've effectively destroyed what 20 or 30 people below me established that I grew off of, because I couldn't take the time to understand it. I couldn't take the time to quantify it, or even understand it, to take the time to understand it, in my opinion, anyways.
Sean, you got any thoughts?
I do. I've been in the same position myself, Corey, where I just didn't understand. No one explained it to me, as you just related. How you described it is how I experienced it myself. And so if it's not being explained to us very well or at all, then it's then for us to figure it out ourselves. And I didn't figure it out for a while because, again, I didn't even know it was on the radar, didn't even know it was something that I should more deeply consider. Just like this conversation, of course, I've had a lot of time, a lot of years now to consider this subject more thoroughly. But there was a time when it wasn't a topic in my head. I understood it to a degree of within my military career. I understood it to a degree with the people that I was responsible for, but I saw it at a scale of standing on the backs of giants, for lack of a better term. And that's as far as I thought. I never thought about the width of those people that I was looking on or standing on. I didn't understand the responsibility to start forming a pyramid of shoulders where I was somewhere down here and I needed more up there. These are things that I didn't think about. I get, or I got the importance or the sacrifices or the lives that were lived before us that helped create us. I get all of that. I just didn't ever think about what my part was so much for the future. I was thinking of the now, not 4 generations from now. I've said to my boys in the past, when they were young and as they started growing up, I said to them directly that, without enough deep thought, I think, I would say to them, look, I'm not trying to teach you how to do this thing in this moment. I'm trying to teach you so that you can teach your son. Right now, my job as a dad is to teach that next generation, the 2 generations of Taylors from now. That's what I'm responsible for. And that's what I want you guys to think about. My kids, I would say to them, that's what I want you to think about right now, is how you're going to do it 2 generations from now. But as I was saying that, I still didn't have a real good understanding of the weight of those comments. But as is life, the older you get, the more you see, the more you understand, the wiser you get perhaps. And every year that goes by now, saying that sentence to them has more and more meaning to me, but not to them maybe, because they're me, 40 years ago when, well, no one told me what I tell my kids. I mean, my dad never said any of these kind of things to me, nor did anyone back then. That people just didn't think that way to some degree. And so this society that we're in right now, people do think this way. People do pass that on to their kids. But I know when I'm saying it to my kids, it's not sinking in the way I want it to. It'll sink in sometime in the future. So maybe either of you guys, have you heard any pro tips to get kids at a young age to listen to the deep wisdom that we're trying to pass out?
I've been struggling with that myself. Corey, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, I've been struggling with that as well, and it's funny because when I think back on my own childhood, obviously I had a fantastic childhood. Now that doesn't mean that we didn't have challenges and struggles and some horrific things happen. But one of the things that when I look back on it, I grew up very poor. I grew up in rent-controlled housing and all the rest of it. But to me, a good day was when my mom made, bran muffins. Like that was a fantastic day. I got a bran muffin. I didn't know anything better. It wasn't until later on when I sort of was in school and stuff like that, and people were talking about trips to Disneyland they were taking, and I'm like, oh, no, that's not even a thing. Like, it doesn't even occur to me that I'm going to go on a trip to Disneyland. We went for one trip to Vancouver for a night. And that was like the biggest thing in my childhood was that's what we did. But the things that I enjoyed didn't have any money or cost associated. What I didn't realize was all the struggles behind the scenes. My parents occasionally would let it slip, but they were doing the best that they could. Now, what I do in order to build on that, now my daughters do not have that problem. Because of choices that we've made in our lives, my wife and I, my daughters don't want for anything. Now, that doesn't mean that we give them everything. And that's something that's very important to me. So my daughter her room is as big as my first apartment. She has no concept of this, that it took me, 17, 18 years to get an apartment that is literally the size of her room. To her, she doesn't complain about it, but she's like, yeah, I got a room. Who cares? But what I do is I try to make sure that they understand that just because, like, for instance, I could buy something for them, it doesn't mean I'm going to. Just because we could go do that, or just because I could solve that problem for you by throwing money at it, or using my experience or influence or whatnot, or privilege to be able to fix that for you, doesn't mean I'm going to do it. Yeah, it's possible, but you have to learn how to do it, same as I did. But what they're doing is they're learning that with my knowledge of having to go through that hard thing and learn it myself. I'm there as a bit of a safety net for them. But they don't necessarily understand the struggles that I went through, but I'm here to make sure that they learn from those struggles and understand from them. They don't have to necessarily go through them themselves, but they're definitely going to have that background when I'm talking to them. When I explain little things to them, like, you complain about this, but I didn't have this until I was 18 and you have it when you're 6. you I think that's where even that small generational passing of the torch comes in, which is I'm passing my knowledge on to you because I had to do hard things. You're still going to do hard things, and even though it could be easy for you, it's not going to be easy for you. And what's going to happen is you're going to double the amount of learning that you get, from what I learned to what you learned to what you're passing on. As Sean said, 2 generations of Taylors down the way. Now it's 2 generations of McGregors. We'll see how it goes. But hopefully what ends up happening is every time they're doubling that knowledge. It's not because we can make it easier, but it's because they're doubling that knowledge every time and they're being successful every time.
We have, my wife and I were talking about this a number of times. We've talked about it over the years, but we always said that it was our job as parents to kind of prop up our kids to the next level, whatever that level is, socioeconomic or whatever, but to give them like the better childhood that we had wished we'd had, or the things that we didn't want, they didn't like, that happened to us. We make sure they don't happen to our kids. But as you said, I think it requires balance. And this is the image that kept coming into my head of, you standing on the shoulders of giants. Well, if those shoulders are really broad, it's quite easy to balance, right? If the deck below you is actually quite stable, then it's easy to balance. But once you actually start putting, somebody else on your shoulders, and I mean, we've all done this, right? You throw your kids up on your shoulders. Over the years, they keep getting heavier. They keep getting heavier, and they become more. They have less center of gravity, less easier to hold on your shoulders. And I think that is the key thing that we need to at least touch on when talking about passing the torch, is how precarious that balance is, in terms of if you balance them too much, then they don't know how to balance themselves. And then they don't know how to teach the balance to the next child, to the next one, and to the next generation. What are your thoughts on balance there, Sean?
Well, I think any good parent wants more for their kids. They want a better life for their kids. They want more success for their kids, whatever that means, those words. But as parents, good parents, I think we want more for our offspring. But that doesn't mean that they get the silver spoon on a silver platter. At least not in our house. You'll freaking earn your way. You'll earn the successes. You'll earn standing on that back. And by that, I mean, just yesterday, Keegan came back he's just finished his first week of his first year of university in rural pre-medicine. An hour-long bus trip there, an hour-long bus trip back. He could take the family car. He's got his driver's license. He could be there in 25 minutes. Nope. You'll earn your way. You'll feel the sting. You'll get marked in this process. If it's seamless, if it's easy, if it's sleepily obtained, what's being built? I feel someone sliding down my back, not standing on my back. And that's important. If you're raised in a culture that just keeps giving, it will take. Any insect will do that. Any human will do that. If you just keep giving, it will keep being taken. So there has to be a reciprocity. There has to be some sort of two-way highway. There has to be a give and take simultaneously. If it's too easy without enough sting, then it's not valued. And so we'll always make our boys' lives easier and better than our lives were, but not so easy and better, so efficiently and effectively, we'll call it too fast, that they don't appreciate what they've currently got, and they won't appreciate the things that they do get.
Corey, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Sean on that wholeheartedly. The thing that keeps sticking in my head is the idea of a mountain in front of you. I've already had to climb that mountain in my lifetime. I know the route, and I've come back down. And now I'm standing there with my kids, and I'm explaining to them, there's a mountain. That's what you need to climb. I'm not picking you up and doing it for you. You'll walk that mountain yourself. The difference is I'm going to be next to you. So I've shown you the way, but you still have to walk it. So they don't have to do it by themselves, but they're still going to put the hard work in.
Absolutely. Now, it took me a while to get here, but there are some comments and questions that I apologize. It's been a really great conversation so far, so I apologize to the people watching. Cody, good to see you. Satch, good morning, team. Salty Jinx says, we got a correction here. He says, it's important to know that there's not a time limit on when you pass on those lessons / evolutions to them. There's no age or date that is set in stone. And that is 100% correct. We have to understand that if we've, as Corey alluded to earlier, write down your 5 things that you would want to tell your kids if you were in the hospital right now. What are those 5 things that you would want to pass on? And you haven't done those yet? Cool. Do them. Have those conversations, I think. As you guys were talking, this really clicked in my head too, and I want to get your thoughts on it. Is that...
Sorry, can you go back to that for a sec?
Sure.
Unless you're moving. Are you staying on that same theme?
I am, yeah. But
okay, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, the idea is that the stablest platform is when you're on your hands and knees, right? Like if you have somebody on your shoulders, the stablest platform for them to stand there would be you on your hands and knees, which means they're not doing any of the work, right? And I think it's important, especially when it comes into this. There's no age or date that is set in stone, in that you can have a conversation at any point in time, whether it is challenging or not. That challenge is up to you, and how much velocity, I guess, or how much effort you want to put into it. What were your thoughts, Sean?
Well, so I'll just hit on on your hands and knees comment. Sure, that's stable, but the person who's on their hands and knees that's supposed to be leading the way can't see very much. Exactly. It's just a thought. Yeah. So on Salty Jinx's comment, I agree with that. However, on that last sentence, and I do agree with that last sentence as well, I think that there is an opportunity there where, all right, let me rephrase it. I think a lot of people believe that sentence to be correct, and then use it as a hard and fast rule for the rest of their lives for their kids. Whereas if you consider something like Spartan Warriors as an example, maybe there was a fixed age that was not debatable. that was not, little Johnny just isn't emotionally intact right now, so he's going to skip this year's rite of passage until he feels like he's ready. That's not how Spartan warriors were created. There was no, I'm going to take the day off on this one. I'll see you next year at the rite of passage. It was go time. It was, you don't get a vote in this time. It was deal breaker time. And so I think that last sentence is fantastic, but it shouldn't be 100% applied for the rest of time.
Corey, what are your thoughts?
I think that Salty Jenks does touch on a really good point here, and to touch on what Sean is saying with the fact that there's no age or date that's set in stone. I think that if we can put it off, generally human beings will put it off, and we need to be very aware of that. That if we have something of value that we want to pass on, the best time is now, and the message is what's important. How you deliver it might depend on the age or date that you do it, but as Sean has alluded to earlier, start it now, start at age appropriate, and build on it. So don't wait and say, I will have this conversation when they're 18 years of age. Well, maybe you're not going to be there. Maybe they're not going to be in a position where they want to listen to you, right? Who knows what's happened in that time. If they're willing to listen to you now, sit down and tell them a story. Tell them something about yourself. Tell them something that you think is important, and see if they pick up on it. And if they don't pick up on it, that's fine. Revisit that later on. But if you state that there's no age or date that is set in stone, people will put it off well past when they should.
Yeah, that was my thought as well. In terms of if you don't give it a set date, it'll never happen. And then and kids are been known, at least in my family, to not listen to their parents pretty regular basis. So I think that is it's good to get it out. And he adds on here. Sorry, it's always better when you start sooner, and 100%. That's the addition to that. Now we're coming close on time here, and I did want to mention the fact that the reason I started with John McCrae's poem was the fact that we now are passing on the torch. Right, we're at the ages we are. We're on the collective talking about this stuff specifically in that concept of passing the torch. We're here passing on knowledge to the world in a hopes that we can create a better future. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the collective in and of itself, and how all of this information, all of this huge information bank, passes on the torch from here on. What do you guys think? Sean, what are your first thoughts?
Well, that's what it's doing, only if someone's listening. And so the difference between this, which is optional, versus parenting, which is mandatory, is the important distinction, I suppose. And if we consider the collective as parenting, there ain't too many teenagers tuning in right now. So I think that the collective is a good opportunity for people our age to learn a lot. I think that the collective is a good opportunity for kids to learn a lot. The appeal of the collective to kids is less than it is appealing to adults. And so, as you said that, what I did think, which is traumatizing me right now, is, gee, Sean, you know what you should do? You should start another sub initiative where you get some people together and start a show for kids and pass on some of this wisdom at an age appropriate level. Yeah, Sean, that's what you're going to do. Right now, I'm trying to scrub that from my head. Because that's the way my brain
Sean's
works.
Story time.
That's right. But I'll hopefully be able to keep that at full arm's distance, and someone else will pick up that torch, as it were, seed planted. So I think that passing the torch is a constancy throughout our lives. I think it should be done at all age levels. I think it should done with the person. It should be done with the person in front of us in the coffee lineup that we don't know, and it should be done with our deepest, bestest friends. Passing the torch isn't something that should put anyone off. It should be a gift to them and to yourself. By giving, you're gifting yourself. By them receiving, you're allowing them to re-gift that to someone else. It's the gift that keeps giving. And I know it sounds like so cliche, but the only way to get a torch brighter is to keep handing out more torches so that all of those little individual torches turn into a singular bright torch in a space called the collective, as it were.
Corey, what do you think?
Use the collective not as the message, but as the spark. So don't sit your kid down and have them watch an hour of me prattling on. It's not going to do them any good. Take one idea, one thought, one phrase that I've used and ask them about that. Show it to them and then say, what do you think about that? Or how would you expand on that? Or however you want to do that, and listen to them and allow there to be uncomfortable silence while they try to figure it out. And inevitably, like my kids, throw their shoulders up and go, I don't know. And ask them, well, why do you think that is? What do you think that he was saying there? Or why do you think he thinks that? And how is that like it in your world? And have that conversation. Use it as the spark to start the conversation. Use the collective and what's said here as that, not as the message. Don't sit them down and do that. I don't think there's any benefit to that.
I can't imagine trying to sit my kids in front of this and be like, just, you're listening to Dad talk for another hour, and they're gonna be like, oh, geez, here we go again. Now, we are just about at time. I do want to touch on this real quick. Just Cody, thank you for your time, everyone. Great talk today. Excited for tomorrow. Good to see you. Tomorrow we are going to be carrying on the conversation from here into the next day. But Monday we start Coaches Week, so I just want to give everybody the heads up on that. It will be happening soon. Do you guys have any final thoughts on passing the torch? I know that kind of was a great final position, but I want to see if there's anything else. Sean?
Yeah, our kids not listening to us while we do the podcast. My kids don't listen to this podcast really ever that I'm aware of. Maybe they will in the future. Hopefully their kids will listen to it. So that whatever I didn't impart into my own sons will be imparted in the future by dead Sean. So I think an interesting way to consider this is whether our kids are listening to us or not in these podcasts, whether they would sit down and listen to more than 30 seconds in this podcast. The fact remains that putting the podcast to the side, they're still watching us every day. They're still listening to us every day. They might not be doing it on a podcast with us every day. Funnily enough, though, our youngest son, Keegan, came up to me a few months ago or I guess a couple of months ago and said, hey, Dad, you should check this guy out on Instagram. He's really funny. Mandatory fun day. And it's a guest that we'd already had on the podcast, who is an extremely funny guy, who I really like. And I said, yeah, we've had him on the podcast. What? You've had him on the podcast? And so in that moment, I gained a shred, a gossamer thin shred of street cred for my son, because all of a sudden I was just a tiny, tiny bit cooler. And I guess for the younger generation, some of the stuff that we talk about is pretty freaking boring because they ain't there yet. So in passing on the torch to your kids, I suppose one way you can maybe do it is be cooler.
Just be cooler. I like that. Corey, any final thoughts?
We spent a lot of time today talking about the act of passing the torch and what's required to do that. But I do want to touch base or emphasize the fact that make sure you have something in that torch to pass on. So make sure that you're living a life that is going to be worthwhile passing on to your kids or to whomever you're trying to pass that torch on to. Make sure there's something there. Look at it yourself right now as you're sitting here and wonder, what am I passing on? Is it knowledge? Is it stories? Is it thoughts? Is it values? Is it a legacy, as it were? If you don't have that, then start doing that. Start filling up that torch in order to hand it off. Don't discount what you're adding to that torch, but also don't overvalue what you're putting in there. Make sure that you're realistic about what it is. And like I said, if you're not doing enough and it's not filled enough, make sure you're filling it right now. Best time is now.
Yeah. Yeah, there's I can hear it in my head right now. There's going to be people that are saying, well, I didn't get a torch, or my torch wasn't, the one that was handed to me was crummy and blah, blah, blah. And that's the key thing is that, well, now you have to build it. Now you got to set up your own torch. You got to break the cycle and create a legacy. And I think that's the biggest part is that it's when you pass on a torch, yes, you're taking some of the fire from previous generations, some of that torch, and handing it forward. But it's up to you to create the best torch that you can. And the only way you can do that is by learning more, by building more, by growing more. And you can do that every day with us here on The Collective. See y'all tomorrow. Chimo.
Chimo.